One afternoon, I picked up my daughter from school and decided to stop by the little store near the corner. It was the kind of neighborhood shop where everyone seemed to know everyone, and the bell on the door jingled like it had been telling secrets for 20 years. My daughter, 6 years old at the time, hopped out of the car like a tiny spring with curly hair. Her backpack bounced behind her, and those big innocent eyes were scanning the world the way curious kittens scanned a room full of yarn. Inside the store, we grabbed a few snacks. Nothing dramatic. Juice boxes, crackers, one suspiciously large chocolate bar that somehow migrated into the basket when I wasn't looking. While we were waiting in line, two police officers walked in. Now, for most adults, this is a perfectly normal event. For a 6-year-old, this was a live episode of Cops, the Tiny Citizen edition. My daughter slowly turned around. Her eyes got bigger. Then she whispered to me, with the seriousness of someone discovering a rare animal. "Mommy, the police." "Yes," I said casually. She stared for another few seconds. Then she straightened her posture, like a miniature government official preparing for an inspection. The officers noticed her staring and smiled. One of them waved. Big mistake, because my daughter immediately waved back with the enthusiasm of someone greeting visiting royalty. "Hello, police," she said very loudly. Half the store turned to look. The officers laughed. "Hi there." One of them said, "How are you?" My daughter marched up to them like a tiny ambassador of the United Nations. "I am good," she announced. Then she pointed proudly at me. "This is my mommy. Nice to meet you," the officer said. Then my daughter leaned a little closer to them and lowered her voice, like she was about to reveal national security information. "My mommy is a good driver," she said. I blinked. The officer chuckled. "That's good to know." She nodded very seriously. "Yes, she stops at the red lights." Pause. Most of the time, I almost dropped the basket. The officers burst out laughing. I tried to recover some parental dignity. "She's joking." My daughter looked up at me, confused. "I am." Then she turned back to the officers. "But sometimes mommy sings very loudly in the car." The second officer nodded solemnly. "That's a serious offense." My daughter gasped dramatically. "Do you give tickets for bad singing?" "Only if it's really bad," he said. She turned and stared at me for a long moment. Then she whispered to the officer, hand shielding her mouth like a tiny spy, "You might need a big ticket." I covered my face. The officers were laughing so hard they had to lean on the counter. But my daughter wasn't finished. She studied their badges, their radios, their belts full of mysterious tools. Then she asked the question that had clearly been forming in her mind. "Do you catch robbers every day?" "Not every day," one officer said. She nodded thoughtfully. Then she pointed at the chocolate bar in our basket. "Good," she said, "because this one was very expensive." The officer leaned closer. "Are you planning a robbery?" She shook her head quickly. "No." Pause. "My mommy is paying." The cashier snorted, trying not to laugh. Finally, after inspecting every shiny button and radio, my daughter gave them a small, polite wave. "Okay, police," she said. "Stay safe." They saluted her. "Yes, ma'am." She walked back to me, with the proud stride of someone who had just successfully handled official government business. As we left the store, she looked up at me and asked casually, "Mommy, if you ever go to jail, can I still bring snacks?" I stared at her. She smiled sweetly, curly hair bouncing, big innocent eyes, and the negotiation skills of a tiny lawyer in training.